we need to take a step back and reimagine what public safety really means in this country, and also put resources in the hands of our communities so we can have proactive solutions that lessen the amount of negative interactions with law enforcement. Violence starts in the community, it's going to end in the community, and the government should be funding that work.
Hey, theGrio fam, it's Gerren Gaynor, White House correspondent and managing editor of politics at theGrio, and I'm here with Congressman Maxwell Frost. Congressman, welcome back to theGrio. Pleasure to speak with you again.
Of course, thank you for having me on.
So obviously, everyone's hearts and minds are right now in Memphis, Tennessee, after the release of the police body camera footage of the deadly beating of Tyre Nichols. Police brutality, I know, was a major part of your campaign for Congress, and now you are a U.S. representative, the youngest member, a member of Gen Z. What was your reaction to witnessing the video, if you saw the video, and how should Congress respond in this moment?
Well, it was very triggering. I did see the video. I personally felt like I had to. Obviously, it's a personal decision for everybody. But I did watch the video, and it was very triggering for me, from my own experiences with negative interactions with law enforcement during the Black Lives Matter uprisings, to seeing, brother George Floyd lynched in broad daylight on video. And here we have another scenario just like that. For me, it really brought me back. And it also reminded me that nothing on the federal level has really been done to help reimagine public safety and build a more equitable system that doesn't criminalize people because the color of their skin or how much money they have, et cetera. And it's a very important conversation we need to have. The fact that the 5 officers were Black does not strip away the other fact that white supremacy and anti-Black sentiments are really were the building blocks for a lot of policing in this country. I'm not saying that, every single police officer is the worst person in the world, but the system itself wasn't created for people like us. And it's the same thing with government too. It's the same thing for the United States Congress. Almost every institution in this country was built on white supremacy. We have to confront that. We have to talk about it, and we have to figure out how we're going to change it so we can actually have an equitable country here and systems that work for us.
And obviously what happened in Memphis has now reignited conversations around federal police reform, the George Floyd bill. You mentioned George Floyd. That bill was introduced and passed in the House, the last Congress, but it did not get too far in Senate negotiations. Those conversations are starting to be worked again. Do you have confidence that your Republican colleagues can coalesce around this major issue and finally pass the federal reform that has been sought for so long?
Unfortunately, for the next 2 years, I do not. And, up here in Congress, it's a math game, right? Passing legislation, you got to have the right math. You got to have the numbers so you can pass what you need. And unfortunately, due to the filibuster in the Senate and due to the fact that Republicans are controlling the House, I don't see us passing the bold transformational legislation we need right now to change things as it relates to public safety in this country. It doesn't mean we don't talk about it. It doesn't mean we don't do what we need to do at the local level to impact that change. It doesn't mean we don't still file bills and still talk about it. But I like to be realistic, especially with our people, with the people in my district, about what the landscape is right now, because we have to understand we need to change the math. And that's why 2024 is going to be so important.
Obviously, there are people who fall on different sides of the issue. Activists, for example, I saw activist Tamika Mallory recently in a rally saying that all police departments should just be shut down. The system does not work. It cannot be reformed. And then obviously in Washington, that is not the sentiment. President Biden has called for more funding for policing, to train police and hire better police. There are so many ideas being presented. But ultimately, do you believe that this gap of trust between law enforcement and Black and brown communities can ever be closed? And can those wounds ever truly be healed, given the historic nature of over-policing and police violence in Black communities?
It's difficult, but I'll say it doesn't get better when we have folks who don't listen to the cries and anxieties and fears of people in Black and brown communities, and predominantly poor folks. And, it's Black and brown people. It's also poor white people as well. And it's important that we see this bigger picture of how anti-Blackness, how class, how race, how white supremacy plays into all these systems. And when we have folks in power who are resistant to even the conversation, it makes me a bit more pessimistic that that gap can be filled. Now, I believe we're going to fill it. I believe we're going to build a more equitable society because I refuse to give up. And because I refuse to give up, the world that I believe we deserve, I think it's within reach, but it's going to take time. It's going to take a movement. I'm a small part of that movement. We need to elect more folks to Congress who understand what that means for our communities. But look, there's a lot of money spent on training. Already, there's a lot of money spent on a lot of measures, and obviously we still have these situations. It doesn't mean training is bad. It doesn't mean body cameras are bad. It just means we have to look beyond that and open up the conversation. And I don't have all the answers. I don't claim to have all the answers, but I do know that we need to take a step back and reimagine what public safety really means in this country, and also put resources in the hands of our communities so we can have proactive solutions that lessen the amount of negative interactions with law enforcement. Violence starts in the community, it's going to end in the community, and the government should be funding that work.
Your colleague and CBC chair, Congressman Stephen Horsford, has called to meet with President Biden, aiming for a meeting this week. He also invited the parents of Tyre Nichols to next week's State of the Union address. Any reaction to that? And what should the president's message overall be to Black America and Black and brown communities across the country, given what happened recently in Memphis?
Yeah, I think it's great what Chair Horsford's doing. And he actually had a bill to break the cycle act last session that would allocate $5 billion towards community violence intervention that helps end gun violence, it helps end crime, and it also works at expanding what public safety really means and involving citizens in that conversation. So I'm a huge fan of his. And, for the president, and, I'm a huge advocate for our president. He's been one of the most pro-union presidents, passing things on climate change, et cetera. And I'd like to see him really dig into this conversation a bit more about how these systems were created and how that impacts things now. We hear a lot, not just from the president, but from a lot of folks talk about their support of law enforcement. And law enforcement plays a large role in public safety right now. I get that, understand that. But I think when a family sees a video of their child being beaten, and to death, I think what they want to hear, and what a lot of Black Americans want to hear, is what the solutions are, and not the normal talking points. Again, I don't have all the answers, but I'm willing to sit down and figure it out. And there are folks who have been doing this work for generations. And I think it's important that we come to the table and talk about it. But unfortunately, this has a very similar cycle to mass shootings, right? The shooting happens, there's outcry, maybe there's protests. Politicians have the same points they put out, thoughts and prayers, and then it goes away. And then it's the next one. But it doesn't go away. The families who lost their loved ones. It doesn't go away. The fact that the system is still criminalizing marginalized people because of the color of the skin or how much money they have in their pocket. Those things never go away. And that's why I ran for Congress, because I'm going to keep making noise on it, both as it relates to gun violence, but also violence that our system puts on us. So I'd like to see, not yes, the president, but also in general, our leaders come to the table. Let's not let this go away and be some news cycle, right? A few months from now, let's take up this call to action and figure out how we're going to fix public safety in this country.
And, there's obviously, for many people, it seems like an easy moral argument to be made, whether it's about, responding to gun violence, to police violence. But Republicans seem to see the issue of policing in particular as, when we talk about reform, as leftist, this woke agenda. Do you think there is a moral argument left to be made to Republicans to get them to work with you and your Democratic colleagues in Congress to really act on the issue of gun violence and police violence?
I think there are some Republicans that we can work with on this, but let's be honest. When you even bring up the conversation of body cameras, which is not considered a radical thing, there are still Republicans in Congress who disagree with stuff like that. right? And so for me, we got to really understand the landscape that we're in, right? It's not far left and radical to call for reform. In fact, if you go on Twitter, you see people calling for other things, right? And so for me, it's important that we let's level ourselves here. The Republican Party has been calling the ref on every issue for generations. What does that mean? It means they've been dragging what's considered the middle more and more to the right. So now if you say something that's not even wildly leftist, right, just something that is, liberal, they'll paint you as a communist or whatever, right, whatever the word is of the day. And we got to call that out for what it is. We want to fix this system, right? There are sets of reforms that can help with that. I also believe beyond reform, we need to take a step back and look at how the system works. And again, and I've said this a million times, I don't have all the answers, and I'm willing to admit that, but we have to come together to a table to do it. I think of the same thing with the reparations conversation. This is why I'm for HR 40, right? No, there's barely anyone claiming to know exactly how it's going to work. But what we want is the commission so we can get to that place. Right. And so when people are refusing to even have a conversation on how we're going to work at fixing public safety, and keep in mind, I'm not just saying fixing policing, it's public safety in general. It's an apparatus. We have to do the whole thing. Then it doesn't feel good, right? It doesn't feel like there's a light at the end of the tunnel, but I know there is. We're electing good people every day. I mean, look at this incoming freshman class and the statements they put out after this lynching, which is what it was. It gives me a lot of hope. So we gotta stay together here. We gotta stay with a joyful resistance. I know it's hard when there's death. I know it's hard when our people are being beat to death by the folks meant to protect us. But we can't give up on this fight.
Yes, optimism is so important. You have to find the silver lining. I hate to end the conversation on another negative note. However, as we grapple with yet another police involved killing of a Black man, there's also this attack on Black history and teaching Black history in classrooms. And ground zero, many feel, is your home state in Florida, where Governor DeSantis most recently worked to ban AP African American Studies course. Do you see a connection between the issue of racial bias and injustice when it comes to policing, and also this battle about race and teaching of race in classrooms? And what is the greater harm with these bans?
Yeah, I see the connection with every issue under the sun, right? It's all connected. And there is a direct connection between the teaching in our classroom, the rhetoric that is done to push these bills, and what we see on the streets, whether it be from, our own people, or whether it be folks in the community or policing, et cetera. And what we know, and this is what I always try to push back, you hear a lot of people say DeSantis is involved in these culture wars. This is what we hear, culture wars. And it is a war on culture. That's part of it. But I also think that diminishes the fact that these bills don't say gay, stop woke, act, not teach, picking out African-American studies out of all these other AP courses and ripping it out. All these bills, it's more than a culture war. This is direct violence on communities. It will result in death. It will result in trauma. It will result in people being bullied in school, right? There are real tangible effects here that we have to talk about. It's not just a culture war. It's not just DeSantis talking. This is real. This is real for our kids. This is real for our community. And these are the type of things where you have folks who are maybe dealing with stuff in their own life. They're already radicalized by this far right movement. And you don't know what the tipping point is for them to go out and do something that they would regret, but that also would cause harm on communities. And we see time and time again with a lot of these racially motivated mass shootings and hate crimes, that when they are asked about how they got to where they were, and when we dive in deep in the mental, what we realize is there were core leaders at the forefront of pushing them to make those decisions. Governor DeSantis, Donald Trump, right? These aren't the creators of this far right fascist movement that is targeting marginalized communities, but they are definitely they're part of it. They're leaders of it, and it's important to recognize that.